Right now, in the blistering heat of the Arabian desert, an army of heavy excavators is carving a trench 105 miles long, straight through the desolate sand. They are not digging a new shipping canal or laying an oil pipeline. They are preparing the bedrock for a $1 trillion gamble. This is the foundation for a megastructure designed to house 9 million people with absolutely no cars, no roads, and no horizontal sprawl. It is a completely vertical city, enclosed within 2 massive mirror-coated walls rising over 1,600 feet into the sky. It sounds like pure science fiction pulled from a movie, but the dirt is already moving. Millions of tons of solid rock and desert sand are being shifted every single day to build what they call the line. For decades, this kingdom has relied almost entirely on crude oil to fund its massive empire, but they know the clock is ticking. To survive the coming decades, they are pouring an unfathomable amount of wealth into reshaping the very earth they stand on. When I look at the raw engineering required for this, I see a project that is either the greatest architectural triumph of human history or the most expensive mirage ever constructed. The sheer logistics needed to pump water, generate power, and cool. A giant glass fortress in a 120-degree desert are simply staggering. This is a high-stakes race against time. We are going to strip away the tourist brochures and look directly at the heavy machinery, the harsh survival tactics, and the bizarre economic reality of living in this extreme environment. Forget the stereotypes. The truth buried in this sand and sand is far more fascinating. Deep in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia sits a sprawling industrial fortress that dictates the price of everything you buy. This is Abqaiq. It is not just an oil facility. It is the beating heart of the global energy machine. If this single plant stops breathing, the world economy goes on life support within 48 hours. You are looking at the largest crude oil stabilization plant on Earth. Every single day, 7 million barrels of raw, volatile crude are pumped out of the Ghawar field and pushed through this massive steel labyrinth. That is nearly 10% of the entire global oil supply flowing through one specific choke point in the desert. The mechanical engineering required to handle this volume is staggering. Raw oil coming out of the ground is incredibly unstable and dangerous. It is packed with lethal hydrogen sulfide gas and highly explosive natural gas liquids. If you attempt to load that raw product directly onto an ocean supertanker, it will detonate long before it reaches its destination. Inside the perimeter of Abqaiq, towering steel pressure vessels boil and separate the crude. The raw heat is relentless. The mechanical roar of the processing units is deafening. Thousands of miles of thick, reinforced steel pipes crisscross the barren floor, handling immense pressures that would snap standard iron like a dry twig. Maintenance crews work around the clock in a brutal environment where summer temperatures routinely exceed 120 degrees. They wear heavy fire retardant gear and carry emergency oxygen masks just to walk the perimeter. It is a masterpiece of heavy industrial engineering, operating under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Because of its absolute necessity to global survival, this facility is guarded better than the Pentagon. It is a prime strategic target, and the Saudi government knows it. You cannot simply drive near the gate. The plant is surrounded by multiple rings of heavily fortified steel fencing and massive earthen berms specifically designed to absorb the kinetic blast of a heavy truck bomb. But the most serious threat comes from the sky. Look closely at the horizon surrounding the facility, and you will see the unmistakable profiles of American-made Patriot missile batteries. Their radar arrays sweep the airspace 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They are permanently locked and loaded to intercept incoming ballistic missiles or sophisticated drone swarms launched by regional enemies. It is a constant, tense standoff. The engineers working the high-pressure valves are entirely surrounded by a high-tech theater of war. A single successful military strike here instantly sends catastrophic shockwaves from Wall Street down to your local gas pump. If you think high-stakes horse racing is intense, you have not seen the desert economy of Saudi Arabia. Every winter, deep in the red sands outside of Riyadh, the kingdom hosts the King Abdulaziz Camel Festival. This is not some simple local county fair or a quaint cultural gathering. It is a massive, ruthless financial battleground where over $66 million in prize money is handed out in a single month. The men competing here are not just herdsmen. They are billionaire oil tycoons, royal family members, and elite businessmen who treat these animals exactly like high-performance racing machines. In fact, a single top-tier camel at this festival routinely sells for well over $3 million, easily eclipsing the price of the most exclusive vintage Ferraris. You might wonder how any animal could possibly command that kind of wealth. The judges are not looking at racing speed or hauling strength. They are judging based on a highly specific and entirely bizarre set of physical traits. A winning camel must possess a massive drooping lip, a perfectly placed hump, thick leathery knees, and a giant pronounced nose. To an outsider, they all look completely identical. But to the wealthy syndicates, betting millions of dollars on a single animal, the exact curvature of a jawline or the width of a neck means the difference between walking away with a massive fortune or losing your entire investment. The auction tents are packed with men, negotiating massive cash deals while armed guards stand by watching the crowds. Because the financial rewards and the tribal prestige are so incredibly high, the level of corruption has reached absolute insanity. Recently, the festival made global headlines for a massive cheating scandal that sounds completely fabricated. Dozens of wealthy breeders were caught red-handed injecting their camels with Botox to make their lips look fuller and more appealing to the judges. But the deception went much deeper than that. Festival veterinarians uncovered evidence of breeders using surgical scalpels to alter the shape of the ears. They found silicone injected into the noses to make them appear larger, and they even discovered the use of rubber bands to restrict blood flow to artificially inflate certain body parts. It was a highly sophisticated black market operation designed to defraud the judges out of millions. The Saudi government responded with overwhelming force. They did not just hand out warnings. They deployed advanced ultrasound machines, X-ray scanners, and genetic testing on the animals to catch the cheaters. More than 40 camels were immediately disqualified in a single sweep, and the owners were hit with crippling financial penalties and public humiliation. In a country where strict laws dictate everyday life, the fact that grown men are risking severe punishment and their entire reputation just to give a camel illegal plastic surgery tells you everything you need to know about the stakes. It is a chaotic mix of ancient desert tradition and modern ruthless capitalism playing out in the middle of a barren wasteland. Look up at the skyline of Mecca, and you will see a piece of structural engineering that absolutely dwarfs Big Ben. Looming over the center of the city is the Abraj al-Bait Tower. It is a colossal steel and concrete fortress dominated by the largest clock face ever constructed by human hands. Each of the 4 clock dials measures an astonishing 141 feet in diameter. The minute hand alone weighs over 20 tons and is built from advanced carbon fiber just to keep the massive motors from burning out. These dials are illuminated by 2 million high-powered lights, making the time visible from over 15 miles away in the dead of night. But this towering structure is not just about keeping time. It was built to help manage a logistical nightmare that no other city on the planet could ever survive. Every year, for exactly 5 days, the population of this desert city violently explodes. Over 3 million people arrive from every corner of the globe simultaneously. They are not tourists taking a casual vacation. They are pilgrims participating in the Hajj, and they all must perform the exact same rituals at the exact same locations at the exact same times. From a crowd control perspective, this is the equivalent of moving the entire population of Chicago through a few square miles of desert within a single work week. If the logistics fail, people get crushed. To prevent catastrophic stampedes, the Saudi government operates a military-grade command bunker. Thousands of cameras and thermal imaging sensors monitor the flow of the crowds in real time to spot dangerous choke points before they happen. They even built a massive multi-level pedestrian structure called the Jamarat Bridge. It is specifically engineered to absorb the kinetic flow of 300,000 human beings, marching shoulder to shoulder every single hour. It is a masterpiece of fluid dynamics applied directly to human movement. But moving millions of people safely is only half the battle. The true enemy here is the brutal Arabian sun. During the peak of summer, the temperatures in Mecca routinely smash past 120 degrees. Packing 3 million actively moving bodies into an open courtyard under that kind of intense thermal radiation should theoretically be a mass casualty event. To solve this problem, engineers designed the most powerful localized cooling grid in existence. The outdoor floors of the Great Mosque are paved entirely with specialized Thassos marble imported directly from the mountains of Greece. This incredibly rare stone naturally reflects intense heat and remains physically cool to the touch even under the blinding afternoon sun. Below the surface, an industrial network of pipes circulates chilled water, creating a massive radiant cooling system under the feet of the crowds. Because massive air conditioning turbines would be too loud, they built a colossal central cooling plant miles away, pushing millions of gallons of freezing water through dedicated underground tunnels. Furthermore, thousands of high-pressure misting poles surround the courtyards, spraying microscopic water droplets into the air to instantly drop the ambient temperature. It is an absolute triumph of thermal engineering that allows millions of people to survive a brutally hostile environment that should otherwise be completely uninhabitable. If you think the Autobahn is the wildest place to drive on Earth, you have clearly never witnessed a Thursday night on the massive desert highways outside of Riyadh. In a country famous for having some of the strictest social laws and most heavily policed public spaces on the planet, there is a bizarre and incredibly dangerous underground subculture that completely defies logic. It is a highly illegal extreme driving phenomenon locally known as hajwala, but to the rest of the world, it is simply called sidewalk skiing. Imagine taking a massive, heavily modified four-wheel drive sport utility vehicle that weighs well over 2 tons and throwing it into a violent high-speed swerve. The goal is not to drift through a corner. The goal is to deliberately snap the suspension hard enough to lift one side of the heavy truck completely off the ground and then balance the entire vehicle on just 2 tires while traveling down a straight highway at over 60 miles per hour. But simply balancing the heavy truck on 2 wheels is no longer considered impressive enough for this adrenaline-fueled subculture. Once the vehicle is completely stabilized on a tilt, the passengers will actually roll down the windows and climb completely out of the moving truck. While the driver constantly adjusts the steering wheel to keep the 2-ton machine from slamming back down onto the asphalt or violently flipping over the men hanging onto the outside of the doors, will perform a live tire change. They will literally unbolt the spinning tires suspended in the air, remove them, and bolt on spare tires, all while the vehicle is cruising down a public interstate at highway speeds. One wrong shift in weight, or a sudden gust of desert wind, will send the entire vehicle rolling into a catastrophic and fatal crash. It is a deadly high-stakes game of physical balance and mechanical extreme that seems utterly impossible until you see it happening right next to you. This insane obsession with car culture stems from a fascinating contrast of immense wealth and an incredibly hostile environment. Go into the heart of any major Saudi city, and you will see the highest concentration of multi-million-dollar European hypercars anywhere in the world. We are talking about custom-built Bugattis and limited-edition Ferraris that cost more than a large estate in America. Yet these flawless machines are being driven in a climate that actively tries to destroy them. Just beyond the smooth city asphalt lies the Rub al-Khali, the completely unforgiving, empty quarter desert, where summer temperatures brutally bake the sand to over 130 degrees. The blowing sand acts like industrial grit, instantly stripping the paint and destroying the intricate air intakes of these incredibly delicate supercars. To own a $3 million hypercar in a place where the ambient heat alone can melt the dashboard and the blowing sand can ruin the engine, in an afternoon is the ultimate flex of financial power. It is a bizarre reality where extreme wealth meets extreme boredom, and the local men choose to push heavy machinery to the absolute edge of disaster just to feel alive in the middle of a barren wasteland. Look at a detailed topographical map of Saudi Arabia, and you will immediately notice a terrifying geographical anomaly. In a landmass roughly the size of the entire United States east of the Mississippi River, there is not a single permanent river. Not one. There are no massive freshwater lakes, and the ancient underground aquifers have been rapidly pumped dry over the last few decades. Yet this incredibly hostile and barren patch of earth sustains a growing population of over 36 million people, lush green city parks, and massive heavy industries. To survive, they do not pray for rain. They rely on brute force heavy engineering. They literally drink the ocean. Along the blistering coasts of the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf sit massive, heavily fortified industrial complexes. These are the largest desalination plants on the face of the earth. Facilities like the Ras Al Khair plant are not just simple water filters. They are colossal mechanical beasts that suck in billions of gallons of highly corrosive salt water every single day. Inside these sprawling steel fortresses, giant intake pipes feed the ocean water into high-pressure reverse osmosis chambers and massive thermal boiling units. The physical pressure required to force dense seawater through microscopic filtration membranes is absolutely immense. It requires rows of massive industrial pumps that generate an incredible mechanical roar, constantly vibrating the thick concrete floors beneath your feet. But defying nature on this massive scale comes with a staggering thermodynamic cost. You cannot just magically separate dense salt from ocean water. It requires an astronomical amount of power. To keep these giant facilities running, Saudi Arabia burns through hundreds of thousands of barrels of their own crude oil every single day just to generate enough heat and electricity to produce fresh drinking water. Think about the sheer economic reality of that situation. They are literally burning their most valuable natural resource, the exact same oil that powers the global economy, just so their citizens can safely turn on the kitchen sink or take a shower. It is a relentless, high-stakes cycle of survival that completely ignores how the rest of the civilized world operates. And they do not just use this brutally expensive water to drink. They use it to grow food in the absolute dead center of a 120-degree wasteland. If you drive deep into the barren dunes, you will find massive windowless steel bunkers. Inside these heavily insulated facilities is the cutting edge of modern agricultural engineering known as vertical farming. They have built entirely artificial indoor ecosystems stacked dozens of feet into the air. High-tech hydroponic systems deliver exact microdoses of desalinated water and chemical nutrients directly to the roots of the crops with zero evaporation waste. Powerful industrial LED lights simulate the exact spectrum of the sun, while heavy-duty air conditioning units constantly battle the extreme thermal radiation pushing in from the outside desert. While lethal sandstorms rage and bake the earth just inches away on the other side of the wall, these indoor facilities are churning out thousands of tons of fresh vegetables. It is the ultimate flex of human engineering, proving that with enough capital and enough mechanical power, you can conquer even the most unforgiving environments on the planet. Deep in the remote desert of Al-Ula, rising out of the flat, barren sand, are massive isolated boulders the size of modern office buildings. If you walk up to these towering rock formations, you will find something completely unnerving. Their facades have been meticulously carved into massive classical tombs with giant columns and intricate doorways. This is Hegra. Most people know about the famous ruins of Petra in Jordan, but this is the second capital of the ancient Nabatean Empire, and it is a complete ghost town. Look closely at the sheer scale of these stone monuments. We are talking about structures over 70 feet tall, carved directly into solid sandstone. The engineering reality of how this was done over 2,000 years ago is absolutely staggering. These ancient masons had no electricity, no hydraulic lifts, and no modern steel power tools. They operated in a brutal, unforgiving desert environment armed only with basic iron chisels, heavy hammers, and an incredibly advanced understanding of geometry. To create these massive facades, they could not build from the ground up like a traditional building. they had to carve from the top down. Workers would climb to the top of a 4-story boulder, suspended only by crude handmade ropes, and start chiseling the roof and the upper columns first. It required absolute mathematical precision. If a stone carver made a single miscalculation halfway down the rock face, the entire facade would crack under its own immense weight, and the entire massive project would be instantly ruined. Working in summer temperatures that routinely exceeded 100 degrees, these men slowly chipped away thousands of tons of solid rock. Yet these tombs stand perfectly symmetrical, defying the harsh desert winds for over 2 millennia. But the most fascinating part about Hegra is not just how it was engineered, but why it was completely abandoned and left untouched for centuries. The Nabateans built this massive city in the middle of nowhere because it sat directly on the most lucrative incense and spice trade route of the ancient world. They heavily taxed every caravan that passed through and controlled the flow of global wealth. But when the Roman Empire expanded its reach, they deliberately shifted the major trade routes to the Red Sea. The heavy cash flow dried up almost overnight. The local economy completely collapsed, and the people simply packed up and walked away, leaving their massive stone necropolis to the mercy of the shifting sands. For hundreds of years after it was abandoned, this site was not just forgotten by history, it was actively avoided. Local Bedouin tribes completely refused to go anywhere near the stone tombs. According to ancient texts and deeply rooted local folklore, the area was considered heavily cursed. The legends claimed that the original inhabitants were wiped out by a violent, catastrophic earthquake as a direct divine punishment for their extreme arrogance and corruption. For generations, people genuinely believed that simply walking through the ruins or drinking from the local wells would bring immediate disaster upon their families and their livestock. Even well into the late 20th century, local guides would refuse to take foreign explorers anywhere near the massive boulders. It sat in absolute silent isolation, heavily guarded by dark superstition and fear. Only in the last few years has the modern government finally opened this ancient ghost city to the outside world. Standing in the shadow of these massive hand-carved monuments is a stark reminder that no matter how much wealth an empire accumulates, the desert eventually claims everything back. Deep in the remote desert of Al-Ula, rising out of the flat, barren sand, are massive isolated boulders the size of modern office buildings. If you walk up to these towering rock formations, you will find something completely unnerving. Their facades have been meticulously carved into massive classical tombs with giant columns and intricate doorways. This is Hegra. Most people know about the famous ruins of Petra in Jordan, but this is the second capital of the ancient Nabatean Empire, and it is a complete ghost town. Look closely at the sheer scale of these stone monuments. We are talking about structures over 70 feet tall, carved directly into solid sandstone. The engineering reality of how this was done over 2,000 years ago is absolutely staggering. These ancient masons had no electricity, no hydraulic lifts, and no modern steel power tools. They operated in a brutal, unforgiving desert environment armed only with basic iron chisels, heavy hammers, and an incredibly advanced understanding of geometry. To create these massive facades, they could not build from the ground up like a traditional building. They had to carve from the top down. Workers would climb to the top of a 4-story boulder, suspended only by crude handmade ropes, and start chiseling the roof and the upper columns first. It required absolute mathematical precision. If a stone carver made a single miscalculation halfway down the rock face, the entire facade would crack under its own immense weight, and the entire massive project would be instantly ruined. Working in summer temperatures that routinely exceeded 100 degrees, these men slowly chipped away thousands of tons of solid rock. Yet these tombs stand perfectly symmetrical, defying the harsh desert winds for over 2 millennia. But the most fascinating part about Hegra is not just how it was engineered, but why it was completely abandoned and left untouched for centuries. The Nabateans built this massive city in the middle of nowhere because it sat directly on the most lucrative incense and spice trade route of the ancient world. They heavily taxed every caravan that passed through and controlled the flow of global wealth. But when the Roman Empire expanded its reach, they deliberately shifted the major trade routes to the Red Sea. The heavy cash flow dried up almost overnight. The local economy completely collapsed, and the people simply packed up and walked away, leaving their massive stone necropolis to the mercy of the shifting sands. For hundreds of years after it was abandoned, this site was not just forgotten by history, it was actively avoided. Local Bedouin tribes completely refused to go anywhere near the stone tombs. According to ancient texts and deeply rooted local folklore, the area was considered heavily cursed. The legends claimed that the original inhabitants were wiped out by a violent, catastrophic earthquake as a direct divine punishment for their extreme arrogance and corruption. For generations, people genuinely believed that simply walking through the ruins or drinking from the local wells would bring immediate disaster upon their families and their livestock. Even well into the late 20th century, local guides would refuse to take foreign explorers anywhere near the massive boulders. It sat in absolute silent isolation, heavily guarded by dark superstition and fear. Only in the last few years has the modern government finally opened this ancient ghost city to the outside world. Standing in the shadow of these massive hand-carved monuments is a stark reminder that no matter how much wealth an empire accumulates, the desert eventually claims everything back. If you traveled to the capital city of Riyadh just 10 years ago, you would have stepped into an entirely different universe. The streets were heavily patrolled by the Mutawa, which was the official and highly feared religious police. They carried wooden sticks and had the absolute authority to arrest anyone who stepped out of line. During the 5 daily prayer times, they would force every single shop and restaurant to immediately lock their doors. Public music of any kind was strictly illegal. Movie theaters were completely banned. Men and women who were not directly related were absolutely forbidden from mixing in public spaces. It was an ultra-conservative fortress that operated under rules completely alien to the Western world. But if you walk those exact same streets today, you will experience a cultural whiplash that defies all logic. The religious police have been almost completely stripped of their power and have vanished from the public eye. Instead of enforced silence, the desert is now vibrating with the heavy bass of massive electronic dance music festivals. Just outside the capital, the government now officially hosts an event called MDL Beast Soundstorm. It is a sprawling multi-day rave that draws well over 700,000 people. You have hundreds of thousands of young Saudi men and women mixing freely, dancing under massive laser light shows and listening to the biggest Western DJs on the planet. Movie theaters are now open and packed. The strict dress codes have been rapidly relaxed. It is arguably the fastest and most extreme social transformation of any nation in modern human history. To understand why this massive shift happened so violently and so quickly, you have to look past the social issues and look directly at the harsh economic reality. The leadership of the country, specifically Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, looked at the global financial data and saw a terrifying future. The entire kingdom was built entirely on a foundation of crude oil, but the world is actively trying to transition away from fossil fuels. If the oil revenue dries up, the entire nation collapses. The ruling family realized they desperately needed to diversify the economy to survive the next century. This massive overhaul is officially called Vision 2030. The primary goal is to stop the massive bleeding of domestic wealth. For decades, wealthy Saudis would take their oil money and travel to Europe or America for entertainment and tourism, pumping billions of dollars into foreign economies. By completely erasing the old strict laws and building massive domestic entertainment industries, the government is forcing that wealth to stay inside the country. They are also aggressively trying to attract Western tourists and international corporate investments to build a new economy based on technology and global trade. They knew they could never attract foreign talent or convince international corporations to set up massive headquarters in a city where music was illegal and movie theaters were banned. So they essentially flipped a switch and dismantled decades of strict tradition almost overnight, not necessarily out of a desire for Western freedom, but as a brutal, calculated move for national economic survival. Look at the southern third of the Arabian Peninsula on any satellite map, and you will see a massive, terrifying void. It is a completely featureless, rust-colored expanse, stretching as far as the eye can see. This is the Rub al-Khali, universally known as the empty quarter. We are not talking about a typical desert with scattered brush and rocky canyons. This is the largest contiguous sand desert on the face of the Earth. To put its sheer physical scale into perspective, this single unbroken sea of shifting sand covers 250,000 square miles. That is a hostile wasteland significantly larger than the entire country of France. There are no paved highways crossing its deep interior. There are no permanent human settlements. It is an ocean of towering silica dunes, some reaching over 800 feet tall, constantly moving and completely reshaping the landscape with every major windstorm. To even attempt to navigate this terrain, modern exploration crews have to use massive, specially engineered heavy trucks equipped with enormous low-pressure aircraft tires just to keep from sinking straight into the abyss. If you want to understand extreme human survival, this is the ultimate testing ground. During the peak of the summer months, the ambient air temperature easily shatters 130 degrees, but the actual surface temperature of the baking red sand can exceed 170 degrees. If your heavy-duty vehicle breaks down out here, and you are stranded without specialized satellite communication technology. Your life expectancy is not measured in days. It is measured in a terrifyingly small number of hours. In this extreme thermal environment, a healthy human body loses water at an astonishing rate of more than 1 quart every single hour, just through basic respiration and sweat. Within just 3 hours of direct exposure without water, your blood begins to physically thicken. Your kidneys start to violently shut down to preserve core moisture, and extreme thermal delirium sets in. Historically, even the most hardened desert nomads completely avoided the deep interior of this wasteland during the summer simply because a single navigational mistake meant absolute certain death. But the most bizarre and unsettling reality of the empty quarter is not the lethal heat. It is the sound. If you stand in the deep silence of these massive dunes, you might suddenly hear what sounds like a squadron of heavy bomber aircraft flying right over your head. But the sky is completely empty. This is an incredibly rare physical phenomenon known as the singing sands. When the wind reaches a specific velocity, it triggers massive avalanches of dry silica sand down the steep slip faces of the towering dunes. As millions of perfectly round sand grains violently rub against each other, they create a massive acoustic resonance. The entire dune actually acts like a giant natural amplifier, producing a loud, low-frequency mechanical drone that vibrates right through the soles of your boots. For centuries, lost travelers and ancient caravans thought these deep humming sounds were the voices of desert demons trying to lure them off their path to die in the sun. Today we know it is pure friction and physics, but hearing a mountain of dead sand roar like a heavy diesel engine is an experience that completely defies human logic. The empty quarter remains one of the very last places on this planet that absolutely refuses to be tamed by modern machinery. It simply exists to remind us that out here, nature is entirely in charge, and it has absolutely no mercy for the unprepared. Imagine driving through a massive canyon of ancient sandstone, and suddenly the landscape completely fractures. You are looking at a building that holds a Guinness World Record, but actively tries to be completely invisible. This is Mariah. It is a massive state-of-the-art concert hall planted squarely in the middle of the Ashar Valley. But instead of pouring concrete or erecting standard steel walls, the engineers wrapped the entire structure in exactly 9,740 giant mirrors. We are talking about over 100,000 square feet of reflective surface. The result is a massive, mind-bending optical illusion. The building perfectly reflects the towering ancient cliffs and the rolling golden sand, making a structure the size of a modern sports arena completely vanish into the brutal desert environment. Building a massive glass box in a mild European climate is easy. Building one in an unforgiving desert that routinely experiences violent high-speed sandstorms is a completely different level of mechanical insanity. Silica sand, driven by hurricane-force winds, acts exactly like heavy industrial sandpaper. If they used standard architectural glass, this pristine mirror would be violently scratched, blasted opaque, and permanently ruined in less than a single month. To solve this massive problem, the engineers had to invent an entirely new type of heavy-duty structural glass. They infused the massive mirrors with copper and coated them in a specialized, highly durable aerospace polymer. This chemical shield is specifically designed to aggressively repel the grinding sand and withstand extreme thermal expansion when the afternoon temperature violently spikes to 120 degrees. But physically resisting the damage is only half the battle. How do you actually keep thousands of massive mirrors perfectly clean when fine desert dust is constantly falling from the sky? You cannot just hire a crew of traditional window washers with buckets and sponges. The sheer scale and the lethal heat make human labor impossible. The daily maintenance relies entirely on an automated army of heavy-duty industrial cleaning robots. These high-tech machines operate on an intricate track system, seamlessly rolling across the massive glass walls in the dead of night. They use specialized high-pressure desalinated water jets and rapid dry brushing techniques to aggressively clear the dust without leaving a single streak. This ensures the massive optical illusion is perfectly reset before the sun comes up. There is a profound and deliberate message built directly into all of this heavy engineering. The word maraya literally translates to reflection in Arabic. For decades, this desert kingdom was entirely closed off, operating completely in the shadows of the global stage. Now they have built the largest mirror on Earth explicitly to show off their harsh, ancient landscape to the modern world. It is a massive, high-tech statement piece. They are taking the brutal, unforgiving reality of the barren desert and reflecting it back as a massive symbol of extreme wealth and cutting-edge survival. It is an architectural masterpiece that demands absolute mechanical perfection in a harsh landscape that usually destroys absolutely is everything you try to build. Imagine waking up going to work and seeing exactly $0 deducted from your paycheck for federal or state income tax. Now, imagine driving home and pulling into a gas station where a gallon of premium fuel costs significantly less than a basic bottle of drinking water. For decades, this was not a financial fantasy. It was the absolute daily reality for citizens living in Saudi Arabia. We are looking at one of the most extreme and fascinating economic systems ever constructed by human hands. In this harsh desert kingdom, the actual physical cost of pumping raw crude oil out of the ground was so incredibly low that the government practically gave the refined gasoline away for free. We are talking about an era where it cost roughly 5 cents to fill up a heavy-duty truck. It created an entire culture built around massive gas-guzzling 8-cylinder engines that were left idling all day long in the driveway simply to keep the air conditioning cold while the owners were inside the house. Meanwhile, Producing the fresh water to wash those heavy cars required burning millions of dollars in massive industrial desalination plants, creating a bizarre reality where water was incredibly precious, but fuel was basically treated like dirt. This system was not just about cheap fuel. It was a highly calculated and unwritten social contract between the absolute monarchy and the general population. The royal family controlled the single most profitable oil export machine in global history, and in exchange for absolute political loyalty, they distributed that immense wealth back to the citizens through a massive, impenetrable welfare state. If you were a recognized citizen, you simply did not pay a single dime of income tax. Your advanced medical care was completely free. Your higher education was fully funded by the state, including all living expenses if you chose to study abroad at an elite Western engineering university. When a young man got married, the government would literally hand him a massive interest-free cash loan to build a custom house, and then routinely forgive the debt entirely. It was a flawless system, as long as the global price of crude oil remained high and the domestic population remained relatively small. But the hard mathematical reality is finally catching up with the desert. The population has rapidly exploded, and the global energy market is violently shifting away from traditional fossil fuels. The government understands that handing out free money indefinitely is an absolute mathematical impossibility. So they are attempting the most dangerous economic tightrope walk in modern history. They have to slowly dismantle the ultimate welfare state without triggering a massive public revolt. The days of 5-cent gas are officially over. The government aggressively slashed domestic fuel subsidies, forcing prices at the pump to spike and deeply shocking a population that had never once worried about the financial cost of a daily commute. For the very first time in history, they introduced a value-added tax on everyday goods, which recently jumped to a punishing 15%. This means massive imported American pickup trucks and heavy machinery suddenly became incredibly expensive. To keep the citizens happy, while fundamentally stripping away their financial safety net, the leadership is rapidly opening up the entertainment sector. They are pouring billions into massive international sporting events and distracting the youth with a newly imported modern lifestyle. They are actively gambling the entire economic future of the kingdom on the hope that providing extreme modern entertainment will make the population forget that the era of completely free money has finally. When you think of the Arabian Peninsula, you instantly picture endless waves of blistering heat and miles of scorching red sand. You certainly do not picture a heavy winter snowstorm. But there is a massive geographic anomaly tucked away in the northwestern corner of this country that completely shatters every single stereotype you have ever seen on television. This is the Tabuk region. If you drive deep into this territory, the flat desert abruptly gives way to a rugged high-altitude mountain range. These are not just small rocky hills. We are looking at jagged granite peaks that soar over 8,000 feet into the sky. If you took a photograph of this rugged landscape and removed the camels, you would swear you were looking at the remote high desert of northern Nevada or the rugged edges of the American Rockies. It is an incredibly harsh and unforgiving terrain, built entirely out of solid rock and deep canyons. Because of this extreme elevation and a highly specific winter wind pattern blowing down from the Mediterranean, something completely unexpected happens here every single year. During the dead of winter, the temperature at these high altitudes violently drops well below freezing, and massive storm systems roll in, dumping actual heavy snow right on top of the desert dunes. It is a completely surreal visual. You have miles of fine golden sand suddenly buried under a thick blanket of pristine white ice. It looks like a glitch in the natural world. In a country where the vast majority of the population lives in a state of constant, intense heat, the arrival of snow triggers an absolute cultural phenomenon. When the winter storm warnings hit the local news, the highways leading up into the Tabuk Mountains are instantly packed with heavy four-wheel drive trucks. Thousands of local men drive hundreds of miles just to intentionally expose themselves to freezing temperatures. But they do not bring traditional skis or expensive high-tech winter gear. They adapt to the extreme environment using exactly what they have on hand. You will see grown men taking the heavy rubber floor mats right out of their expensive luxury trucks and using them as makeshift sleds to race each other down the steep, snow-covered sand dunes. They build massive, roaring campfires right on the icy snowbanks and brew thick traditional coffee while wrapped in heavy wool desert coats. They use the hoods of their vehicles to build snowmen right in the middle of a landscape that will eventually bake at 120 degrees in the summer. It is an incredible display of local adaptation and a side of this region that is almost never shown to the outside world. It proves that this massive landmass is not just one continuous baking oven. It is a geographically complex and rugged frontier where nature still has the power to completely surprise you, forcing the people who live here to constantly adapt to wildly extreme environments. It is a stark reminder that the desert has many different ways to test human endurance, and sometimes that test comes packed in solid ice. If you look across the Red Sea toward the massive coastal city of Jeddah, you will see the skeletal remains of what was supposed to be the ultimate triumph of human engineering. Rising over 800 feet into the air is a massive concrete stump surrounded by silent cranes. This is the Jeddah Tower. Its sole purpose was to completely shatter the world record held by the Burj Khalifa and become the very first building in human history to reach a height of 1 full kilometer. We are talking about a structure designed to pierce the clouds at over 3,280 feet. The engineering required to push millions of tons of steel and concrete to that altitude borders on absolute madness. When you attempt to build a kilometer into the sky, gravity is no longer your biggest enemy. Your biggest enemy is the wind. At 3,000 feet, the wind does not just blow. It creates massive, violent vortexes that can actually wrap around a flat surface and physically rip a building completely apart. To survive this, the engineers designed the Jeddah Tower with a highly aerodynamic triangular footprint. As the tower rises, the wings continuously taper and change shape to aggressively slice through the high-altitude wind currents and prevent those deadly vortex-shedding vortexes from forming. To anchor this colossal spire, they had to drive massive concrete piles nearly 400 feet deep straight into the unforgiving coastal bedrock. But even if you manage to successfully build a tower that tall, you still have to figure out how to physically move human beings to the top without them passing out. At those extreme heights, the change in air pressure is so severe and rapid that a standard elevator ride would cause excruciating pain and ruptured eardrums. So the engineers partnered with heavy industrial firms to design the most advanced elevator system ever conceived. These massive carbon fiber cars were engineered to travel at an astonishing 22 miles per hour. But to keep the passengers safe, they had to invent a computerized aerodynamic dampening system combined with highly precise active air pressure regulation perfectly mimicking the slow descent of a pressurized commercial aircraft cabin. Yet despite all of this brilliant heavy engineering, the massive tower currently sits completely abandoned, baking in the unforgiving desert sun. The project violently stalled years ago, not because the physics failed, but because the underlying financial and political foundation completely collapsed. Massive corruption crackdowns swept through the kingdom, directly targeting the billionaires and the massive construction syndicates funding the project. The primary contractors were suddenly stripped of their wealth, and the money completely dried up overnight. For years, it has stood as a massive multi-billion-dollar concrete tombstone. However, recent reports suggest the government might finally inject new capital to restart the heavy machinery. Until those cranes start moving again, the Jeddah Tower remains the ultimate symbol of the sheer hubris and the massive risks involved in trying to conquer the sky. For decades, this massive desert kingdom operated entirely behind closed doors, securely locked away from the rest of the civilized world. They had the largest oil reserves on the planet, and they simply did not need anyone else. But those days are completely over. The walls have been violently torn down, and Saudi Arabia is now operating as the largest and most aggressive construction site in modern human history. They are pouring trillions of dollars into a frantic, high-stakes race to completely reshape their entire civilization before the oil money finally runs dry. They are carving futuristic linear cities directly out of solid bedrock, building colossal floating industrial ports on the Red Sea, and forcefully converting a strict traditional society into a high-tech global hub almost overnight. It is an absolute economic gamble of unprecedented scale. As you look at the heavy machinery shifting mountains of dead sand, you have to ask yourself one brutal question. Is this a brilliant masterpiece of extreme engineering that will successfully secure their survival for the next century? Or is it just the most expensive temporary mirage ever built in the desert? If you want to see how the neighbors are competing, watch our next breakdown of the United Arab Emirates.